My name is Robert Martinez, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. I was wrong. Before we dive into this story, and trust me, you need to hear every single word, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. This story happened right here in Phoenix, Arizona, but betrayal is universal. And if you've ever been stabbed in the back by someone you trusted with your life, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button now, because what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil and your heart race. It was a Tuesday morning in March when my world collapsed for the second time in 6 months. The first collapse happened when my son Michael, my only child, my pride and joy, lost his battle with pancreatic cancer at just 34 years old. 6 months of watching him waste away, 6 months of chemo that did nothing but steal his smile, 6 months of sleepless nights in hospital chairs that felt like medieval torture devices. But this Tuesday morning? This was different. This was the day I learned that grief makes people show their true colors, and sometimes those colors are pitch black. I was sitting in my kitchen, well, what used to be my kitchen in the house I'd lived in for 27 years, drinking coffee from the same mug Michael gave me for Father's Day in 2019. It had a chip on the handle from when he accidentally knocked it off the counter while helping me move furniture the weekend before his diagnosis. I never fixed it. Now I was grateful for that chip because it was one of the last physical traces of my son touching something in this house. The morning sun was streaming through the window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that Michael and I had installed together during his college years. He measured twice and cut once, just like I taught him. Those floors were perfect, not a single gap or imperfection. Unlike the woman who was about to walk down those very floors and destroy everything. I heard her heels clicking against the wood, sharp, deliberate, like gunshots in the silence. Rebecca had always been dramatic, but since Michael's death, her flair for theatrics had morphed into something cold and calculating. She appeared in the doorway wearing a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her green eyes look like ice chips. The reading of Michael's will had been just 48 hours earlier. 48 hours since I'd sat in that sterile lawyer's office, surrounded by mahogany and leather and the smell of old money, listening to my son's final wishes. Rebecca had inherited everything, the house worth $2.8 million, the life insurance policy worth $4.2 million, his business assets worth another $3 million. $10 million total, give or take. I'd inherited his watch, his car, and a few personal items. More importantly, the will stated I could live in the house for as long as needed to grieve and adjust. Michael knew I'd need time. He knew this house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof to me. It was 27 years of memories. It was the place where I'd raised him after his mother died in that car accident when he was 7. But apparently, Rebecca had a different interpretation of as long as needed. She stood there in my kitchen doorway, arms crossed, looking at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found stuck to her shoe. The morning light hit her face in a way that highlighted every sharp angle, every carefully sculpted feature that had once made Michael's face light up when he talked about her. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there during Michael's illness, the way she'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming she was running errands. The way she'd answer her phone in another room and speak in whispers. The way she'd grown distant even as my son grew weaker. But grief has a way of making you blind to everything except the pain. And I'd been drowning in that pain for 6 months, unable to see the storm that was building right in front of me. What she said next would replay in my mind 10,000 times over the following weeks. Each word carved into my memory like a brand, searing and permanent and impossible to forget. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against those perfect hardwood floors. Coffee spread like blood across the wood grain, seeping into the gaps that didn't exist, except now they did. Just like the gap that had just opened up in my understanding of who Rebecca really was. But that was just the beginning. What happened next would test every belief I had about justice, family, and the lengths a broken man will go to when he's been pushed too far. The clock on the wall ticked forward, 9:47 a.m., March 15th. the exact moment my real education in betrayal began. The words that came out of Rebecca's mouth that morning weren't just cruel, they were surgical in their precision, designed to cut deepest where I was most vulnerable. "Robert, we need to talk." Her voice had the same tone she'd used to discuss Michael's funeral arrangements, businesslike, detached, as if emotions were just obstacles to efficient communication. I bent down to pick up the pieces of the shattered mug, my hands shaking. Not from age, but from a growing sense that something terrible was about to happen. "Of course, Rebecca. What's on your mind?" She didn't help me clean up the coffee or the broken ceramic. She just watched me crawl around on my hands and knees, sopping up liquid with paper towels while she delivered her verdict. "I've been thinking about the living arrangements here, and I've decided it's time for you to move out." I stopped cleaning and looked up at her from the floor. The morning sun behind her created a halo effect that would have been beautiful on anyone else, but on Rebecca it looked ominous, like a solar eclipse. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. I need you gone by the end of the week." I struggled to my feet, my 63-year-old knees protesting against the hardwood that had suddenly become an enemy. "Rebecca, the will specifically states. The will states you can stay as long as needed." "Well, I've decided you don't need to stay any longer." The audacity hit me like a physical blow. This woman, who'd been married to my son for barely 3 years, was telling me, the man who'd lived in this house for 27 years, who changed Michael's diapers in the nursery upstairs, who taught him to ride a bike in the driveway out front, that I was no longer welcome in my own home. "Rebecca, please. I know we're all grieving, but Michael wanted me to have time too. Michael's dead." The words came out flat and emotionless, like she was reading stock prices. "His wants don't matter anymore. What matters is that I own this house now, and I don't want you living in it. If you've ever had someone close to you die, you know that grief plays tricks on your mind. You find yourself defending the deceased person's honor even when they're not there to defend themselves." That protective instinct kicked in hard. "How can you talk about him like that? He's been gone 6 months, Rebecca." 6 months. You were supposed to love him." Something flickered across her face then, not guilt or sadness, but annoyance, like I'd interrupted an important meeting with my emotional outburst. "I did love him. Past tense. But I'm 28 years old, Robert. I have a life to live, and I can't do that with his grieving father hovering around like a ghost, reminding me of everything I've lost." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly crafted, that for a moment I almost bought it. Almost believed that this was about her grief instead of what I was slowly realizing it actually was, her greed. "Where am I supposed to go? This house is my life, Rebecca. Every room holds memories of Michael. The garage where I taught him to change oil, the backyard where we built that treehouse when he was 10, I don't care." She cut me off with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. "That's not my problem anymore. You have 5 days to find somewhere else to live." I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chairs Michael and I had picked out at a furniture store 12 years earlier. He'd been in his early 20s then, just starting his business, full of dreams about the future. We'd spent 3 hours in that store, testing chairs, talking about how important it was to have comfortable seating for family dinners. "Rebecca, please. I'm not asking to stay forever. Just give me a few more months to figure things out, to find a place that feels right. Michael would want." "Don't." Her voice turned sharp as broken glass. "Don't tell me what Michael would want. You want to know what Michael would want? He'd want me to be happy. He'd want me to move forward with my life instead of being trapped in this museum of memories." That's when I knew. Call it intuition, call it a father's instinct, call it whatever you want, but I knew in that moment that Rebecca had been planning this conversation since the day Michael died. Maybe even before. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the loving wife who'd supposedly held my son's hand as he took his final breath. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd been wearing a mask for 3 years and had finally decided it was safe to take it off. "I've already contacted a real estate agent," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she saw me deflating. "The house will be going on the market next month, I'm moving to California. Fresh start, new life, all that. Next month? Rebecca, you can't be serious. The memories in this house aren't just mine, they're Michael's too. This is where he grew up, where he learned to be the man you fell in love with. She laughed then, a sound like champagne glasses breaking. Fell in love with? Robert, did you ever stop to wonder why a 25-year-old woman would marry a man with terminal cancer? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I felt something cold creeping up my spine, a recognition of a truth I had been too grief-stricken to see. What are you saying? I'm saying your son was very, very wealthy. And very, very sick. Do the math. The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. The morning sun that had been warming the room suddenly felt harsh and blinding. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling over. You knew. You knew he was dying when you married him. Of course I knew. Everyone knew. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6-month prognosis. But Michael was optimistic, wasn't he? Always talking about beating the odds, about experimental treatments, about having years and years together. She shrugged. He was half right. We did have years together. Not many, but enough. The world I thought I'd been living in for the past 3 years crumbled around me like a house of cards in a hurricane. Every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every moment I'd watched Rebecca supposedly caring for my dying son, all of it had been a performance. You never loved him. I was fond of him. He was sweet, generous, naive. Easy to care for. But love? She shook her head. Love doesn't pay for penthouses in Malibu, Robert. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Get out. Excuse me? Get out of this kitchen. Get out of my sight. I don't care what that will says, I don't care what you inherited. You don't get to stand in my house and tell me you never loved my son. For the first time since she'd walked into the kitchen, Rebecca looked genuinely surprised. Maybe she'd expected me to crumble completely, to accept her cruelty with the same defeated resignation I'd shown during Michael's illness. But something had changed in those last few minutes. The grief that had been crushing me for 6 months was transforming into something else, something harder and more focused. This is my house now, Robert. You'd do well to remember that. And you'd do well to remember that your husband, my son, isn't even cold in his grave yet. But I guess that doesn't matter to someone who married him for his money in the first place. Her green eyes flashed with something dangerous. Be very careful, old man. You're living under my roof at my discretion. Push me too far, and that discretion might run out faster than you think. She turned to leave, those sharp heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown timer. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at me with a smile that would have made a shark proud. Oh, and Robert? I'd start looking at apartments in your price range. Social Security doesn't go as far as it used to, and something tells me you're going to need every penny. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt like a crime scene. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a blur of disbelief and growing rage. I found myself wandering through the house like a ghost, touching objects that held memories of Michael, trying to reconcile the woman who just revealed her true nature with the loving wife I thought I'd known for 3 years. In Michael's old bedroom, the one Rebecca had converted into an office within weeks of his death, I found boxes of his belongings that she'd apparently been sorting through. Medical bills, business documents, personal letters. But also photographs. Hundreds of them, chronicling his life from childhood through those final months. I picked up a photo from their wedding day. Michael looked so happy, so full of hope despite the diagnosis that had already been eating him alive for 2 months. His arm was around Rebecca's waist, and she was smiling at the camera with what I'd always believed was genuine love. Now I saw it differently. Now I saw the smile of a woman who just won the lottery. But it was Wednesday that Rebecca showed me just how deep her cruelty could go. I was in the garage, sorting through tools that Michael and I had collected over the years. Every socket wrench, every screwdriver held a memory of a project we'd tackled together. I was lost in thoughts of teaching him to change brake pads when he was 16 when I heard her car pull into the driveway. She wasn't alone. Through the garage window, I watched Rebecca get out of her silver BMW, Michael's final gift to her, purchased just 3 weeks before he died, and walk around to the passenger side. A man emerged. Tall, athletic, probably in his early 30s. He was wearing an expensive suit and designer sunglasses, the kind of man who never worked with his hands a day in his life. They were holding hands. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Michael had been dead for exactly 6 months and 4 days. I knew because I'd been counting every single one, marking them off like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. Rebecca saw me watching from the garage window. Instead of showing even a shred of shame or embarrassment, she smiled and waved, then pulled the stranger closer and kissed him. Right there in the driveway. On the same concrete where Michael used to park his truck. They walked into the house through the front door, talking and laughing like they owned the place. Which, I suppose, they did. I stayed in the garage for 2 hours, pretending to organize tools while listening to voices and footsteps moving through the house above me. At one point, I heard Rebecca giving what sounded like a tour, her voice bright and cheerful as she described room dimensions and architectural details to her guest. "And this is the master bedroom," I heard her say, her voice carrying down through the floor. "Michael and I were very happy here." The lie was so casual, so effortless, that I had to grip the workbench to keep from screaming. When they finally came back downstairs, I forced myself to walk into the house through the connecting door. Rebecca was in the kitchen making coffee, using the expensive espresso machine Michael had bought her for Christmas, just 2 months before he died. "Oh, Robert," she said when she saw me, her tone artificially bright. "I'd like you to meet Jason. Jason, this is Robert, Michael's father." Jason extended his hand with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to making good first impressions. "Nice to meet you, sir. Rebecca's told me so much about you." I'll bet she has, I thought, but I shook his hand anyway. His grip was firm and his smile was perfect, and I immediately disliked everything about him. "Jason's a real estate developer," Rebecca explained, busying herself with coffee preparations. "He's been helping me think through some options for the property." "Options?" I asked, though I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. "Well, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm planning to sell. But Jason thinks there might be better alternatives. The lot is quite large, and the location is prime. Isn't that right, Jason?" Jason nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. This neighborhood is ripe for development. We could tear down the existing structure and build something much more contemporary. Maybe a modern glass house, really maximize the square footage and the views." Tear down the existing structure. He was talking about demolishing my home, Michael's childhood home, like it was nothing more than an obstacle to profit. "I see," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, that's just one option," Rebecca said, though her smile suggested it was her preferred option. "We're exploring all possibilities." I excused myself and went upstairs to my bedroom. From the window, I could see the backyard where Michael and I had built that tree house when he was 10 years old. It had taken us an entire summer, working every weekend, measuring and cutting and fitting boards together with the patience of craftsmen. Michael had insisted on painting it blue and yellow, his favorite colors at the time. The treehouse was still there, weathered but sturdy. Rebecca probably saw it as another piece of debris to be cleared away when the bulldozers came. That night, after Jason left and Rebecca disappeared into her room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan was familiar, a language I'd learned over 27 years of living within these walls. Thursday morning brought a new humiliation. I was making breakfast when Rebecca walked into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that barely covered her knees. She was carrying her phone and talking loudly to someone, clearly not caring that I could hear every word. "No, the timeline is perfect," she was saying, pouring herself orange juice from a carton that Michael used to drink from every morning. "The estate is settled, the assets are liquid, and the old man will be gone by the weekend." The old man? That's what I'd become to her, Not Robert, not Michael's father, not the man who'd welcomed her into this family with open arms. Just an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. Trust me, darling, she continued, leaning against the counter where Michael used to sit and read the morning news on his tablet. By next month, we'll have the entire $10 million working for us. The house sale will just be icing on the cake. She ended the call and looked at me with barely concealed contempt. Good morning, Robert. I trust you slept well? Who was that? I asked, though I already knew. Jason, if you must know. We're making plans. Plans that involve my son's money. My money now, she corrected. Legally obtained through marriage and inheritance. All perfectly legitimate. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her directly. Tell me something, Rebecca. When Michael was dying, when he was lying in that hospital bed, asking you to promise you'd take care of me, what were you really thinking? For a moment, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, but irritation at being reminded of an unpleasant memory. I was thinking about how to make his final days as comfortable as possible. Just like any loving wife would. And when he made you promise to make sure I was okay? When he asked you to treat me like family? I promised him what he needed to hear. She shrugged. Dying people need comfort, not truth. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. This woman had looked my dying son in the eye and lied to him about her intentions toward his father. She'd given him false peace in his final moments. You're a monster, I said quietly. I'm a realist, she replied. Michael was dying anyway. At least this way, his death accomplished something productive. I stood up so abruptly that my chair fell over backward, hitting the floor with a crash that echoed through the house like a gunshot. Get out, I said again, my voice shaking with rage. We've been through this, Robert. This is my house now. You're the one who needs to get out. That's when she said the words that would haunt me for weeks, the words that would drive me to actions I'd never thought myself capable of. She walked closer, her silk robe rustling with each step, until she was standing just inches away from me. Close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, close enough to see the complete absence of compassion in her green eyes. You know what, Robert? I'm tired of pretending to be patient with you. I'm tired of pretending this is difficult for me. So let me make this crystal clear, you're not welcome here anymore. You're not wanted here anymore. Pack your things and go stay in a dumpster for all I care, because that's about what you're worth to me now. The words hit me like physical blows. Stay in a dumpster. That's what Michael's widow thought of his father. That's what the woman who'd inherited $10 million of his money thought I was worth. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by 27 years of memories that she was about to erase for profit. But she'd made a crucial mistake in revealing her true nature so completely. She'd shown me exactly who I was dealing with, and exactly how far she was willing to go. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that sometimes the most dangerous person in a room is the one who has nothing left to lose. Friday morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom for what I thought might be the last time. Rebecca had made it clear that my 5-day eviction notice was non-negotiable, and I had nowhere to go. At 63, with limited savings and a monthly Social Security check that wouldn't cover rent in a cardboard box in Phoenix, I was facing homelessness. But something had changed in me during those 3 days of revelation and humiliation. The grief that had been crushing me was hardening into something else, something focused and determined. Rebecca thought she'd broken me with her cruelty, but instead, she'd awakened something I hadn't felt in decades. I was angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, calculating anger that builds pressure over time until it finds a way to explode. I spent the morning calling senior living facilities, homeless shelters, and extended stay motels, trying to find somewhere, anywhere, I could afford on my fixed income. The conversations were uniformly depressing. Either the places were too expensive, too far away, or too dangerous for a man my age. Around noon, while I was eating what I assumed would be my last meal in my own kitchen, the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized, Brennan, Walsh and Associates, the law firm that had handled Michael's estate. Mr. Martinez? This is Patricia Walsh. Could you come in this afternoon? There are some details about your son's will that I'd like to discuss with you privately. Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. Patricia Walsh was the senior partner who'd handled Michael's estate planning. She was in her 50s, sharp as a razor, and had a reputation for being scrupulously honest in a profession not known for that quality. What kind of details? The kind that are better discussed in person. Would 2 o'clock work for you? I looked around the kitchen that would soon belong to someone else, at the coffee maker I'd used every morning for 27 years, at the window that looked out onto the garden where Michael and I used to throw a baseball when he was a kid. I'll be there. The law offices of Brennan, Walsh and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Phoenix. I'd only been there twice before, once when Michael was setting up his estate planning, and once for the reading of his will. Both times, I'd felt overwhelmed by the marble floors, the expensive artwork, and the general atmosphere of serious money being seriously managed. Today felt different. Today I felt like I belonged there. Patricia Walsh met me in the lobby personally, which seemed unusual. She was a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my car was worth. But her handshake was warm, and her eyes held something that looked like sympathy. Robert, thank you for coming on short notice. I know this has been a difficult time for you. She led me to her corner office, which had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Phoenix sprawled out below us like a circuit board, all straight lines and geometric patterns baking under the desert sun. Can I offer you coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. Mrs. Walsh, what's this about? I thought everything with Michael's will was settled. She sat down behind her desk and opened a thick file folder. Please call me Patricia. And yes, the will has been probated and the assets distributed according to Michael's wishes. But there are some aspects of his estate planning that I think you should be aware of. Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. What kind of aspects? Patricia pulled out a document that looked different from the will that had been read to us earlier that week. This one was thicker, with multiple pages and tabs marking different sections. Robert, how well did you know your son's business affairs? Pretty well, I thought. He started the consulting firm right out of college, built it up over 12 years. He used to tell me about his clients, his employees, the challenges he was facing. And his relationship with Rebecca? How well did you feel you knew that? The question felt loaded, dangerous. I thought I knew it well. Obviously, I was wrong about a few things. Patricia nodded slowly. Michael came to see me 6 months before he died. He was already quite ill, but he was still sharp, still thinking clearly about the future. He had some concerns. She pulled out another document. This is a private investigator's report that Michael commissioned in January of last year. My blood went cold. A private investigator? Michael suspected Rebecca was having an affair. He hired a PI to follow her, to document her activities. Patricia's voice was gentle but clinical. The report confirmed his suspicions. She slid a series of photographs across the desk. They showed Rebecca with a man I recognized immediately, Jason, the real estate developer who'd been holding her hand in my driveway just yesterday. These photos were taken 9 months ago, Robert. 9 months before Michael died. I picked up the photos with hands that weren't quite steady. Rebecca and Jason at expensive restaurants, embracing outside luxury hotels, kissing in the front seat of her BMW, the same car that Michael had bought her as a wedding anniversary gift. Michael knew she was cheating on him? He knew. But Robert, there's more. Patricia pulled out another document. Based on the PI's findings, Michael began monitoring Rebecca's communications. Her email, her text messages, her phone calls. She paused. He discovered that Rebecca and Jason had been planning to inherit his money from the very beginning. The office seemed to tilt on its axis. Planning? Rebecca met Jason 2 months before she met your son. Jason is the one who suggested she target Michael specifically. They researched his business, his assets, his medical condition. The entire relationship was orchestrated. I felt like I was falling through space. Every memory I had of Rebecca and Michael together was suddenly suspect. Their first meeting at a charity fundraiser, her seemingly genuine interest in his work, her tears when he was diagnosed, all of it had been calculated. But she married him. She stayed with him through the illness. She stayed with him through the illness because leaving would have meant getting nothing in a divorce. But staying, playing the devoted wife until the end. Patricia shrugged grimly. That meant inheriting everything. I set the photos down on the desk because my hands were shaking too badly to hold them steady. Why are you telling me this now? Patricia leaned forward. Because Michael anticipated this conversation. He knew that once he died, Rebecca would show her true colors. He knew she tried to force you out of the house, probably as quickly and cruelly as possible. She pulled out yet another document. This is a codicil to Michael's will. A secret amendment that only I was aware of. A codicil? Additional instructions that weren't read at the main will reading. Instructions that only become active under certain circumstances. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What circumstances? Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. The codicil states that if Rebecca attempts to remove you from the family home within the first year after Michael's death, or if she shows evidence of having been unfaithful to Michael during their marriage, certain provisions of the will become null and void. What provisions? All of them. Patricia's smile grew wider. The house, the life insurance, the business assets, everything reverts to you as Michael's sole surviving family member. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 20 floors below. Are you saying? I'm saying that as of Monday, when you provide me with documented evidence that Rebecca has ordered you to leave the house, she will lose everything. The $10 million, the property, all of it. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what I was hearing. Patricia continued. Michael was very specific about the conditions. Rebecca had to prove herself worthy of inheriting his legacy by treating you with respect and honoring her promises to care for you. She's failed that test spectacularly. But how did he know? How could he have predicted exactly what would happen? Because he knew Rebecca better than she realized. And because he knew that greed and cruelty always reveal themselves eventually. Patricia gathered the documents back into the folder. Michael loved you very much, Robert. More than anything, he wanted to make sure you were protected after he was gone. I thought about Michael lying in that hospital bed, making Rebecca promise to take care of me. I thought he was naive, trusting his faithless wife to honor a deathbed promise. But he'd been 10 steps ahead of all of us. What happens now? Now you go home and wait for Rebecca to make her next move. Based on what you've told me about her ultimatum, I expect she'll try to force you out very soon. When she does, we trigger the codicil, and everything changes. Patricia walked me to the elevator, her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt almost maternal. Robert, I want you to understand something. Your son was brilliant, and he loved you more than life itself. What's about to happen isn't revenge, it's justice. Michael's justice. As the elevator descended through the glass tower, I watched Phoenix shrink below me and felt something I hadn't experienced in 6 months. Hope. Rebecca thought she'd won. She thought she'd manipulated everyone perfectly and gotten away with the crime of the century. But Michael had known her better than she'd ever realized, and he'd set a trap that she'd walked into with her eyes wide open. The prey was about to become the predator. I drove home from Patricia Walsh's office in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just learned. Michael hadn't just known about Rebecca's betrayal, he'd planned for it. Every cruel word she'd spoken to me over the past 3 days had been another step into the legal trap my son had constructed. But I also knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one hint that I knew more than I was letting on, and Rebecca might become suspicious. For now, I had to continue playing the role of the broken, defeated old man she expected me to be. When I pulled into the driveway, her BMW was gone. Good. I needed time to think, to process everything Patricia had told me, and to prepare for what was coming next. Inside the house, I found a note on the kitchen counter written in Rebecca's precise handwriting. Robert, gone to California for the weekend to look at properties. Be moved out by Monday, or I'll have the locks changed and your belongings thrown in the dumpster where they belong. R. Even her goodbye was cruel. But now I understood it differently. This wasn't just meanness, it was legal evidence. Every harsh word, every documented threat was helping to fulfill the conditions of Michael's codicil. I spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation. On the surface, I went through the motions of a man preparing to be homeless. I called a few more senior living facilities, looked at some apartments I couldn't afford, even priced storage units for the belongings I'd have to abandon. But underneath, I was preparing for something else entirely. I was getting ready to watch Rebecca's world crumble. Monday morning arrived gray and overcast, unusual for Phoenix in March. I was up before dawn, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through the kitchen window when I heard her car in the driveway. Rebecca came through the front door like a woman returning from conquest. She was wearing a new outfit, designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. Her hair was freshly styled, and she had the glow of someone who'd spent the weekend being pampered at expensive spas. "Good morning, Robert," she said, her voice artificially cheerful. "I trust you've made arrangements for your new living situation?" "I'm working on it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady and defeated. "Working on it isn't good enough. Today is Monday. You need to be gone by tonight, or I'm calling a locksmith and having you forcibly removed." She set her purse down on the counter and looked around the kitchen with the satisfaction of a conqueror surveying her territory. "I had the most wonderful weekend in Malibu. Jason showed me some incredible properties. Ocean views, infinity pools, the works. It's amazing what $10 million can buy when you're not wasting it on sentiment." Every word was like a nail in her own coffin, though she didn't know it yet. "Rebecca, please. Just give me one more week. I've found a place, but I need time to." "No." The word came out sharp and final. "I've been more than generous with you. It's time for you to face reality." She walked to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of expensive champagne, Dom Perignon, the same brand Michael used to buy for special occasions. The sight of her opening a bottle that was probably meant to celebrate anniversaries they'd never have made my stomach turn. "What are you celebrating?" "New beginnings," she said, working the cork loose with practiced ease. "Freedom from the past. The start of a beautiful future." The cork popped with a sound like a gunshot, and champagne foamed over the rim of the bottle. Rebecca laughed and grabbed a crystal flute from the cabinet, fine china that had been a wedding gift from Michael's business partner. "You know what the funny thing is, Robert? Michael actually thought I loved him. Right up until the end, he believed I was the devoted wife who'd stick by him through sickness and health." She took a sip of champagne and smiled. "It's amazing how gullible dying people can be." I gripped the edge of the kitchen table to keep myself from doing something I'd regret. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I knew that everything she said was being recorded by the voice-activated app I'd downloaded on my phone that morning, on Patricia Walsh's advice. "He trusted you," I said quietly. "He trusted everyone. That's why he was so easy to manipulate. Michael saw the best in people, even when the best wasn't there." She raised her glass in a mock toast. "To Michael Martinez, may he rest in peace, knowing his money is being put to much better use." That was it. That was the moment I knew that whatever happened next, Rebecca had earned every bit of suffering that was coming her way. "I need to make a phone call," I said, standing up from the table. "Make all the calls you want. Just make them from somewhere else after 6 o'clock tonight." I went upstairs to my bedroom and dialed Patricia Walsh's number. She answered on the second ring. "Patricia, it's Robert Martinez. She's doing exactly what you said she would. Are you recording the conversation?" "Yes, just like you told me. She's downstairs right now, drinking champagne and bragging about how she manipulated Michael." "Perfect. Can you get her to put the eviction demand in writing? I'll try. Good. Bring me whatever documentation you can get, along with the recording. We'll file the paperwork this afternoon. I hung up and went back downstairs, where Rebecca was pouring herself a second glass of champagne. The alcohol was making her even more talkative than usual, which was exactly what I needed. Rebecca, if you're serious about me leaving today, I'm going to need something in writing. For the moving company, for the storage facility. They need official documentation. She waved her hand dismissively. Fine. Whatever makes this easier. She grabbed a piece of stationery from the kitchen drawer, expensive paper with her new monogram, RJM, in gold lettering, and began writing. I watched over her shoulder as she documented her own downfall in elegant script. Robert Martinez must vacate the premises at 4247 Desert Vista Drive by 6 p.m. today, March 21st. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and removal of all personal belongings. This property is now under my sole ownership, and Mr. Martinez is no longer welcome here under any circumstances. Signed, Rebecca J. Martinez, property owner. She signed it with a flourish and handed it to me with a smug smile. There. Is that official enough for you? I folded the paper carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. This should do fine. Excellent. Oh, and Robert? Don't bother leaving a forwarding address. I won't be sending Christmas cards. At 3:30 p.m., I was sitting in Patricia Walsh's office again, this time with a very different energy in the room. Patricia had listened to the entire recording, read Rebecca's handwritten eviction notice, and reviewed the photographic evidence of her affair with Jason. This is better than I hoped for, she said, her professional composure barely containing what looked like glee. Rebecca has violated every condition of the codicil. The affair, the cruelty toward you, the attempted eviction, it's all documented. What happens now? Now I make a phone call that's going to ruin Rebecca's entire day. Patricia dialed a number and put the call on speaker. After 3 rings, Rebecca's voice filled the office. Hello? Rebecca, this is Patricia Walsh from Brennan, Walsh and Associates. I need you to come to my office immediately. There are some urgent matters regarding Michael's estate that require your immediate attention. There was a pause. I thought the estate was settled. What kind of matters? The kind that are better discussed in person. How quickly can you be here? I suppose I can be there in an hour. Is everything all right? Everything will be clarified when you arrive. Please bring Jason with you. Another pause, longer this time. Jason? Why would Jason need to be there? Because he's directly involved in the matters we need to discuss. 1 hour, Rebecca. Don't be late. Patricia hung up and turned to me with a smile that could have powered the entire city of Phoenix. Robert, in about 90 minutes, you're going to witness something very special. You're going to watch a woman who thought she'd committed the perfect crime discover that she's been living in a house of cards. Will I be there when you tell her? Oh, you'll be there. Michael's codicil specifically requires that you be present when the inheritance is revoked. He wanted you to see justice served. I leaned back in the leather chair and felt something I hadn't experienced since before Michael got sick, complete and total satisfaction. Rebecca thought she was coming to a routine legal meeting. Instead, she was about to discover that my brilliant son had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and she had no idea what was waiting for her. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Rebecca and Jason walked into Patricia Walsh's office. I was already seated in one of the leather chairs facing Patricia's desk, positioned so that I could see their faces clearly when the truth hit them. Rebecca looked nervous, which was unusual for her. She changed into a more conservative outfit, a black business suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. How appropriate. Jason, on the other hand, looked annoyed at being dragged into what he clearly assumed was tedious legal paperwork. He was wearing another expensive suit and checking his Rolex every few seconds like a man who had more important places to be. Patricia, Rebecca said, settling into the chair next to mine. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? Patricia smiled the kind of smile that lawyers reserve for their favorite victories. Rebecca, Jason, thank you both for coming. What I'm about to share with you will require your complete attention. She opened the thick file folder that had been sitting on her desk. Rebecca, do you remember signing the standard disclosure agreements when Michael's estate was being planned? Of course. Why? And do you remember the clause about additional provisions that might be revealed after the initial will reading? Something flickered across Rebecca's face, not quite fear, but the beginning of unease. Vaguely. But you said all the provisions had been covered. I said all the standard provisions had been covered. But Michael included some special instructions that only became active under certain circumstances. Jason leaned forward impatiently. What kind of circumstances? And why am I here for this family discussion? Patricia pulled out the photographs I'd seen earlier, the ones showing Rebecca and Jason together 9 months before Michael's death. She spread them across the desk like playing cards. You're here, Jason, because you're directly involved in the fraud that Rebecca committed against my client. The color drained from Rebecca's face so quickly I thought she might faint right there in the chair. Jason, meanwhile, went from annoyed to genuinely alarmed in the space of a heartbeat. Fraud? Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. Marriage fraud, inheritance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. Shall I continue? Patricia's voice remained perfectly professional, but there was steel underneath the politeness. Michael knew about your affair, Rebecca. He knew about the entire plan. She pulled out the private investigator's report and set it on top of the photographs. Your husband hired professionals to document your activities. Every dinner, every hotel meeting, every intimate moment you thought was private, it's all here in living color. Jason shot to his feet like the chair had caught fire. I don't have to listen to this. Whatever arrangement Rebecca had with her husband is none of my business. Sit down, Mr. Reeves. Patricia's voice cut through the air like a blade. It became your business the moment you helped plan a murder. Murder? Rebecca's voice cracked on the word. Oh, yes. Michael's illness may have been natural, but your systematic emotional abuse during his final months, your calculated deception, your complete abandonment of medical support toward the end, legally speaking, that constitutes a form of murder. Psychological murder at minimum. Patricia pulled out another document. This is Michael's real will. The complete version that includes all codicils and conditional clauses. She began reading in a clear, steady voice. In the event that my wife, Rebecca J. Martinez, attempts to remove my father, Robert Martinez, from the family home within 12 months of my death, or if evidence is discovered of infidelity during our marriage, all assets bequeathed to her in the primary will shall be immediately revoked and transferred to Robert Martinez as my sole heir. The office went completely silent except for the sound of Rebecca's increasingly rapid breathing. Furthermore, Patricia continued, if Rebecca J. Martinez is found to have married me under false pretenses or with the primary intent of inheriting my assets, she shall be considered to have committed fraud against my estate, and criminal charges may be filed at the discretion of my father and legal representatives. Rebecca slumped in her chair like a marionette with cut strings. No. No, that's not possible. You read the will? I inherited everything. You inherited everything conditionally. And you violated every single condition. Patricia set the document down and looked directly at Rebecca. As of today, you own nothing. The house, the life insurance, the business assets, all of it reverts to Robert. Jason was backing toward the door. I had nothing to do with any marriage fraud. I met Rebecca after she was already married. Patricia smiled coldly. Actually, Mr. Reeves, according to the private investigator's report, you met Rebecca on February 14, 2023. She didn't meet Michael until April 20, 2023. 2 months later. Would you like to revise your statement? Jason stopped moving. I could practically see his mind racing, trying to calculate how much trouble he was in. Here's what's going to happen, Patricia continued, her voice taking on the tone of a judge delivering a sentence. Rebecca, You have 24 hours to remove all personal belongings from the house at 4247 Desert Vista Drive. Any items left after that time will be considered abandoned property. But I don't have anywhere to go, Rebecca said, her voice small and defeated. I suggest you call Jason. I'm sure he'll be happy to help, given how much he's benefited from this arrangement. Jason was already shaking his head. Rebecca, I can't. I mean, my wife doesn't know about this is complicated. And there it was. The final betrayal. Jason was married. Of course he was. Men like him always were. Rebecca turned to look at him with an expression of absolute devastation. Your wife? Rebecca, look, what we had was never meant to be permanent. You knew that. I left everything for you. I gave up everything. You gave up nothing, Patricia interrupted. You stole everything, and now you're losing it all. There's a difference. Rebecca turned to me then, her green eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine for the first time since I'd known her. Robert, please. I know I said terrible things, I know I hurt you, but please don't do this. I have nothing without Michael's money. For a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked so young, so lost, so completely destroyed. But then I remembered her standing in my kitchen, drinking champagne and bragging about manipulating my dying son. I remembered her telling me to go live in a dumpster. I remembered her laughing about how gullible Michael had been. You should have thought about that before you decided to marry my son for his money, I said quietly. You should have thought about that before you spent his final months lying to his face. You should have thought about that before you told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. Rebecca began crying then, deep, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I loved him. I did love him, at least at the end. When I saw how good he was, how kind. You loved his bank account, I said. The rest was just good acting. Patricia stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Rebecca, Mr. Reeves, you both need to leave now. Robert, I'll have the new ownership papers ready for your signature tomorrow morning. Jason was already heading for the door, clearly desperate to escape before things got worse for him. Rebecca stumbled after him, still crying, begging him to wait for her, to help her figure out what to do next. At the doorway, she turned back one last time. Robert, this isn't over. I'll fight this. You'll what? Patricia interrupted. Hire a lawyer with money. You don't have to fight a case you can't win. Rebecca, you committed fraud. The evidence is overwhelming. The only reason you're walking out of here instead of being arrested is because Robert hasn't decided whether to press criminal charges yet. That stopped Rebecca cold. Criminal charges? Marriage fraud, inheritance fraud, elder abuse. Depending on how far we want to take this, you could be looking at serious prison time. Patricia's smile was razor-sharp. My advice? Take your personal belongings and disappear quietly. Don't make this worse for yourself. Rebecca looked at me one last time, her face a mask of desperation and rage and complete defeat. Then she followed Jason out the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to her own destruction. When they were gone, Patricia poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle she kept in her desk drawer. To Michael, she said, raising her glass. To Michael, I repeated. We drank in silence, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt like my son was truly at peace. Justice had been served, exactly as he'd planned it. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal blur of legal paperwork, phone calls, and the strange sensation of watching my entire world flip upside down, again. By Tuesday afternoon, I was legally the owner of everything Rebecca had thought she'd inherited. The house where I'd lived for 27 years was mine again. The bank accounts she'd been planning to drain were under my control. The life insurance money she'd already started spending was back in my name. $10 million. At 63 years old, I'd gone from facing homelessness to being wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that Michael had reached out from beyond the grave to protect me, to ensure that his father wouldn't be thrown away like garbage by a woman who never loved him. Patricia Walsh had been right. it wasn't revenge. It was justice. I spent Tuesday evening walking through the house, seeing it differently now. Every room held memories of Michael, but also memories of the past week's revelations. The kitchen where Rebecca had told me to live in a dumpster. The living room where she'd brought Jason to plan the destruction of my home. The front door she'd expected me to walk through for the last time. Now it was all mine again, legally and permanently. Around 8 p.m., I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Rebecca get out of a taxi. Apparently Jason hadn't been willing to help her even with transportation. She was wearing the same black suit from the lawyer's office, but now it was wrinkled and she looked like she'd been crying for hours. She rang the doorbell. When I opened it, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes that held a mixture of desperation and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Robert, please. Can we talk?" Every instinct told me to slam the door in her face, to give her the same treatment she'd given me. But curiosity won out. I wanted to hear what she had to say now that she'd lost everything. "You have 5 minutes." She stepped into the foyer. Her foyer just yesterday, my foyer again today. She looked around like she was seeing the house for the first time, taking in details she'd never bothered to notice when she thought she owned it all. "I know you have no reason to believe me," she began, her voice shaky and small. "But I need you to know that I did love Michael. Not at first, you're right about that. But toward the end, when I saw how brave he was, how he faced dying without bitterness or anger, I fell in love with the man I'd married for the wrong reasons. If that's true, why didn't you stop? Why didn't you call off whatever plan you had with Jason?" She sank into the chair by the front window, the same chair where Michael used to sit and read the newspaper every Sunday morning. "Because I was in too deep. Because I was scared. Because I'm a coward who thought she could have it both ways, keep Jason happy and honor Michael's memory." "You honored his memory by bragging about manipulating him?" "I said that because I was angry and scared and trying to convince myself that what I'd done was okay." She looked up at me with eyes that seemed genuinely tortured. "Robert, I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't take back the cruel things I said to you. But I'm begging you, please don't press criminal charges." "Why shouldn't I?" "You committed fraud. You psychologically abused a dying man. You tried to make me homeless. Because I'm already destroyed. I have nothing left. No money, no home, no relationship. Jason made it very clear yesterday that he wants nothing to do with me now that the money's gone. I'm 28 years old and I've lost everything." I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another performance. But what I saw looked like genuine devastation and regret. "Where will you go?" "I don't know. I have a sister in Oregon who might let me stay with her for a while. I'll find work somewhere, try to start over." She wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to ask, can I have just a few more personal items? Some photos from the wedding, some of Michael's letters to me? I know I don't deserve them, but—" "There are boxes in the garage," I said quietly. "I packed up Michael's personal things months ago. Take whatever you want that belonged to him. The photos, the letters, anything that was his." Her face crumpled with relief and gratitude. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know. But Rebecca," I continued, my voice harder now, "if I ever see you again, if you ever try to contest this inheritance or cause me any more trouble, I will press every criminal charge Patricia Walsh can think of. Do you understand?" "I understand." "And Robert? I know this doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for what I did to Michael's memory. He deserved better." She went to the garage and spent about an hour going through boxes, occasionally crying over a photo or a letter. When she was done, she had filled 2 small bags with mementos. "The taxi's waiting," she said when she came back inside. "I'll be gone in 5 minutes. Rebecca," I called as she reached for the door handle. She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes like she thought I might change my mind about everything. "If you really did love my son at the end, then honor that love by being better than you were. Don't let this destroy you completely. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll try. I promise I'll try. And then she was gone, walking out of my life as suddenly as she'd entered it 3 years earlier. I watched through the window as the taxi pulled away, carrying the woman who'd almost destroyed everything Michael had worked to build. The house felt different with her gone, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the walls themselves. I walked from room to room, reclaiming spaces that were mine again, thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. Over the following weeks, I began to understand the full scope of what Michael had planned. The private investigator's report revealed that Jason was married to a woman named Christina, and that he'd been running similar cons on wealthy widows across the Southwest. Patricia Walsh helped me compile evidence and forward it to authorities in 3 states. I learned that Michael's business was more successful than I'd realized, with contracts and partnerships that would continue generating income for years. The house in Phoenix was just one of several properties he'd owned. There was also a cabin in Colorado and a small office building in Tucson that generated rental income. My son hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been wealthy and smart, and incredibly generous. Once I understood the full scope of his assets, I realized he could have left me much more in the original will. Instead, he'd given most of it to Rebecca as a test of her character, knowing that if she failed the test, I'd inherit everything anyway. If she'd been kind to me, if she'd honored her promises to him, if she'd shown even basic human decency, she would have kept the fortune and lived happily ever after. But greed and cruelty had cost her everything. 3 weeks after Rebecca's final exit from my life, Patricia Walsh called with news. Jason Reeves has been arrested in California. Turns out he was running the same inheritance scam on 2 other women. Rebecca's cooperation with authorities helped build the case. Rebecca cooperated? Fully. She provided records, testified about their planning sessions, admitted to everything. The prosecutor thinks she's genuinely remorseful. I thought about the broken woman who'd sat in my foyer, crying over photos of my dead son. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe losing everything had forced her to face who she'd become. Will that help her avoid prison time? Probably. She'll likely get probation and community service. A second chance to build a decent life. I found myself hoping she'd take advantage of that second chance. Not because I'd forgiven her completely, but because Michael would have wanted her to become better than she'd been. That night, I sat in my backyard looking up at the stars, thinking about the strange twists life can take. 6 months earlier, I'd been a grieving father facing homelessness. Now I was a millionaire with a future full of possibilities I'd never imagined. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful for a son who'd loved me enough to protect me even after death. Grateful for justice served and wrongs made right. Grateful for the chance to honor Michael's memory by using his gifts wisely. The stars seemed brighter than usual that night, and I could have sworn one of them winked at me, my boy, letting me know that everything had worked out exactly as he'd planned. 2 months after Rebecca's departure, I thought the drama was behind me. I was settling into my new reality, learning to manage Michael's business interests, making decisions about investments and properties, slowly accepting that I was no longer just a grieving father but a man with resources and responsibilities. That's when Patricia Walsh called with news that would shake me to my core one more time. Robert, I need you to come to my office. There's something else about Michael's estate that we need to discuss. The tone in her voice was familiar, the same careful professionalism she'd used when she'd first told me about the codicil. But this time, there was something else underneath it. Excitement? Nervousness? I couldn't tell. More secret provisions? I asked, only half joking. Something like that. Can you be here this afternoon? When I arrived at Patricia's office, she had another thick folder waiting on her desk. But this one looked different, older, more worn, like it had been handled many times over the years. Robert, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. Michael left very specific instructions about when this information should be revealed to you. She opened the folder and pulled out a letter in Michael's handwriting. The envelope was addressed to me in his familiar script, but it was sealed and marked with a date that made my breath catch. It was dated just 1 week before he died. He asked me to give this to you only after the situation with Rebecca had been resolved, and only after you'd had time to process everything that happened. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Michael's final letter to me was 3 pages long, written in the careful penmanship I remembered from his childhood thank you notes. Dad, if you're reading this, it means Rebecca showed her true colors and you've inherited everything I worked to build. It also means you're probably wondering how I knew exactly what would happen. The truth is more complicated than Patricia has told you so far. Yes, I knew about Rebecca's affair. Yes, I knew she'd married me for money. But there's something else you need to know. I wasn't dying of pancreatic cancer. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at Patricia, who was watching me with the careful attention of a doctor monitoring a patient's reaction to shocking news. What does he mean? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Keep reading, she said gently. Dad, I know how terrible this must sound, but please read the entire letter before you react. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that would eventually kill me, but very slowly, over decades, not months. The symptoms were manageable with medication, and I could have lived a relatively normal life for many years. But then I met Rebecca, and within months I realized she was only interested in my money. The private investigator confirmed that she and Jason had targeted me specifically because they believed I was wealthy and vulnerable. That's when I made a decision that I know will be hard for you to understand. I decided to let them think they had succeeded. I worked with a team of doctors, ones Rebecca never met, to fake the progression of pancreatic cancer. The weight loss, the weakness, the hospital stays, all carefully orchestrated. Patricia has all the medical records that prove I was never actually dying. I set the letter down and stared at Patricia in complete shock. Are you telling me that Michael isn't dead? Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. Finish the letter, Robert. The plan was complex but necessary. I had to make everyone, including you, Dad, and I'm so sorry about that, believe I was dying so that Rebecca would reveal her true nature. If she'd known I might live for decades, she never would have shown me who she really was. I spent 6 months documenting every cruel thing she said and did, every time she disappeared to be with Jason, every moment she thought she was getting away with the perfect crime. All while she thought she was caring for a dying husband. The hardest part was watching what it did to you, Dad. Watching you grieve for a son who wasn't actually dying nearly killed me. But I knew that if the plan worked, if Rebecca exposed herself completely, we could build a real life together, one based on truth instead of deception. By now, Patricia has shown you all the evidence of Rebecca's fraud. What she hasn't told you yet is that as of today, I'm officially cured of my terminal illness and ready to start the next chapter of my life. Dad, I'm not dead. I've been in hiding for the past 6 months, waiting for this moment. Waiting for justice to be served and for us to be free to be a family again. I know you're probably furious with me right now. I know this deception has cost us both more than I ever wanted it to. But I also knew it was the only way to protect everything I'd worked to build and to make sure you'd be taken care of if something really did happen to me someday. Patricia will explain the rest. But Dad, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me for putting you through this, I'm ready to come home. I love you more than life itself. Michael. The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I'd just read. He's alive? Patricia nodded. Very much alive. And waiting downstairs in the parking garage, if you want to see him. I shot to my feet so fast that the leather chair rolled backward and hit the window. He's here? Right now? He's been living in the cabin in Colorado for the past 6 months, growing back his natural hair color and gaining back the weight he'd lost during the deception. He looks like himself again. I was already heading for the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. But Patricia's voice stopped me. Robert, wait. You need to understand something first. What Michael did, faking his own death, putting you through months of grief, it's not legally fraudulent because he never actually died or filed a false death certificate. But it was cruel in ways I'm not sure he fully understood when he planned it. I turned back to face her. Are you saying I shouldn't see him? I'm saying you should see him only if you're prepared for the fact that your relationship will never be the same. The son you've grieved for the past 6 months isn't the same man who's waiting in the parking garage. He's someone who is capable of watching you suffer for half a year in service of an elaborate revenge plot. She was right, and part of me knew it. But a much larger part of me, the part that had been broken for 6 months, was screaming that my child was alive. I have to see him, I said. Patricia nodded and handed me her car keys. Parking level B2, space 47. Robert? Whatever you decide after you see him, know that Michael's assets are still legally yours. He set up the inheritance to transfer regardless of whether he was actually dead. You don't owe him anything. I took the elevator down to the parking garage on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the rows of cars. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as I walked towards space 47. And there, leaning against a silver Honda Civic, was my son. He looked exactly like himself again, healthy, strong, alive. His hair had grown back thick and dark, his skin had color, and he was wearing jeans and a polo shirt like any normal person on any normal day. When he saw me coming, he straightened up and took a few tentative steps forward. His eyes were filled with hope and fear and something that looked like shame. Hi, Dad, he said quietly. For a moment, we just stood there staring at each other across 10 feet of concrete and 6 months of deception. Then the dam burst, and I ran to him like he was still the 10-year-old boy who'd fallen out of the treehouse and needed his father to make everything okay. When I hugged him, he felt solid and warm and completely, wonderfully alive. But even as I held my son and felt the relief of knowing he hadn't left me forever, part of my mind was already beginning to grapple with the magnitude of what he'd done. The man in my arms was my child, but he was also someone who'd orchestrated one of the most elaborate deceptions I'd ever heard of. Someone who'd watched me grieve for months without saying a word. The reunion I'd never dared hope for was about to become the most complicated conversation of my life. The conversation that followed in that parking garage was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. There's no handbook for how to react when your dead son tells you he's actually been alive and hiding in Colorado for 6 months while you grieved for him. Dad, I know how this looks, Michael said, his voice carrying the same gentle tone I remembered from his childhood apologies. I know what I put you through was unforgivable. I pulled back from the hug and looked at his face, really looked at it. The hollow cheeks were filled out again. The gray pallor was replaced with healthy color. The tired, defeated eyes I remembered from his final months were bright and alert. You let me watch you die, I said, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. You let me sit by your hospital bed and hold your hand while you pretended to waste away. I had to make it convincing. If Rebecca suspected for even a moment that I wasn't really dying. So you chose her deception over my sanity? The anger was building now, cutting through the relief and joy of seeing him alive. You chose revenge over your father's emotional well-being? Michael flinched like I'd slapped him. It wasn't supposed to hurt you this much. I thought once it was over, once you knew the truth, it would all be worth it. Worth it? I stepped back, putting distance between us. Michael, do you have any idea what the last 6 months have been like for me? Do you understand that I buried my only